Good morning, good evening, and good night, everybody. My name is Alejandra Chacon. I am really glad to co-host with Aitana Mezcua the hour 7 of this 2026 Spring Equinox Connectathon. The order of this conversation will be as follows. First, I will introduce the session and the participants, and then the participants will jump in, trying to, with the purpose of answering some questions that we prepare for this session, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. So around the world, there are multiple groups trying to rethink and reshape our human relationship with the land and nature. History has shown us how different cultures have thought nature and land as something that has its own agency and that holds the space for each creature in an interconnected way. Today, with the environmental destruction that we are facing across the world, there are multiple communities such as academia, civil society, and even some governments looking for new ways to build community in harmony with nature. That suggests that we may have to ask some new questions and create even new words, as we talked during the morning in the sessions of the beginning of the Connectathon. And this new question be about our relationship with the land and nature. So today we have in our panel 3 Mexicans from different backgrounds and generations to talk about Mexican experiences that recover the soul of the land through participatory and intercultural projects. Our panel is integrated in alphabetic order by Aitana Mezcua Chacon. She's my daughter, and she's a third undergrad student at the University of Toronto, where she's double majoring in history and ancient Middle Eastern civilizations with a focus on law, historical memory, and the relationship between legal systems and social justice. So this super connected with the purpose of this Connectathon. Aitana also has a certified program at the University of Oxford focused on Britain between 1914 and 1945. She was born in Mexico City and raised in Canada. And her academic work explores how legal institutions, historical narratives, and cultural memory shape collective identities and public understanding of the past. Aitana will, she has worked on different places, such as the Memory and Tolerance Museum, Mexico City. She's participating in the Soul of a City project, and now she's working for this Connectathon. So she will be a guest, but also a co-host in this session. So thank you very much, Aitana, for this. Secondly, Dr. Arturo Chacon Torres, he is my uncle, and he has an incredible pathway on finding the soul of the land from academia to climate action in Mexico. He was the first biologist to graduate from the Faculty of Biology in La Universidad Michoacana de San Nicolás de Hidalgo, that it's the oldest university in Latin America. He is professor, researcher, and dean of the Institute for Research on Natural Resources from the same university, where he was part of the founders and was director. He has served to this institution 50 years. He holds a master and PhD in science for the University of Stirling, Scotland. And in terms of leadership, he has founded multiple organizations in Mexico. For example, the Mexican Association of Limnology, the Water Advisory Council of Michoacan, the Mexican Academy of Environmental Impact Assessment. He's a founding member of the Panorama Ambiental, and now it's the current president of the College of Biologists of the same state, Michoacán. Her research is focused on and his professional activity is focused on aquatic ecology, aquaculture of native species, ecological land use planning, environmental impact assessment, and climate change. Arturo, thank you very much for being here. I know that your contributions will be very helpful in the effort of this community to build new references and paradigms to build a relational dialogue between communities for the sake of our planet. Now, Aitana will follow the session. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aitana, your second co-host, and I have the great honor of introducing to everyone Cynthia Villafaña, who is a strategic communications specialist with experience in supporting social development initiatives across Mexico. Her work focuses on building narratives and public engagement strategies that connects community, civil society, organizations, and decision makers around projects related to sustainable development and social inclusion. Throughout her career, she has worked with organizations such as World Vision, the World Resource Institute, the Fondo para la Paz, and Promotora Social Mexico. She has contributed to communication strategies, participatory campaigns, and partnerships that amplify community voices and strengthen locally driven solutions. Her work explores how communication can support participatory process, strengthen trust among diverse actors, and help translate community knowledge into broader public dialogue. With that said, thank you, Cynthia, for joining us today. And this discussion today will be facilitated by Alejandra and myself. So, a little bit on the questions. In preparation for this session, we asked the participants, including myself, to think about two different questions. After each question, I will let know the participant who's going, and we'll also post them in the chat so the audience can have reference to the topic that we're talking about. So the first one is, from your experience, how can we build dialogue and a shared sense of responsibility across generations to create intergenerational justice? To answer this question, I invite Cynthia to share her experience and expertise, and Arturo, and then myself as a member of the new generations. And yeah, I'm ready to go. So Cynthia, whenever you're ready, we're more than excited to listen to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to be a part of these conversations. I want to share with you a little bit of reflections from my experience working in communications, narratives, and ecosystems, building across NGOs, foundations, and more recently, spaces connecting social organizations with impact investment. This has allowed me to witness how engagement can change processes over time, especially in complex and uncertain contexts. With that said, I've been a witness from the building intergenerational dialogue and shared sense of responsibility that starts by creating spaces with different generations that can genuinely listen to each other. In many rural and indigenous communities, there are already a strong sense of continuity, and elders hold the memory of the land. It's their history, it's their changes, the practices that they have sustained over time, while younger generations are navigating new realities and shaping future possibilities. When participatory processes allow these perspectives to meet, something important happens. The conversations moves beyond immediate um, experiences and starts to focus on deeper questions. What should we be preserving? What should we what should be what should evolve and what kind of future the community wants to build? This kind of dialogue requires time and trust, but also requires recognizing that there are different generations that hold different forms of knowledge, and both are necessary and impactful to each other. From what I've seen, this is not something that can be designed externally. It emerges when communities are able to connect with their past, their present, and future through shared conversations and decisions, and this is what allows responsibility to be shared across generations and sustained over time. And also to acknowledging that the person you are looking in the mirror, it's not the only one with the answers. You need to spread the knowledge and the experience that different generations holding each other together to form a better future. And that's why what I've been witnessing in what I have witnessed throughout my professional labor, it's that we need to listen what the communities are saying, not only what we think that they need, but also what they really understand as a future for their own development, as subjects with dignity, participation, and knowledge throughout what they're willing to do and move across to make themselves better. That's intergenerational justice, bringing them all together and helping each other to move forward with all their problems and obstacles, but with hope and uh, hindsight of of um, of deeper meaning throughout the communities. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us on this, Cynthia. Arturo, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm grateful because it's an honor to share my experiences with this great event that we have sharing now. Well, in Mexico, in one of the lakes, central lakes, we are fortunate Mexicans because we still have one of the oldest cultures in America. These are the Purépechans, or also known as Tarascans, and they were contemporary civilization with the Aztecs, and actually they were very strong enemies between them, and they have many battles fighting for the possessions of the central Mexico. Now we still have these civilizations around Pátzcuaro Lake. We can remember is where the Night of the Dead was born, this celebration, and now it's a touristic center, a touristic region. But unfortunately, through the time, several environmental impacts and the loss of natural resources around this area has been a very strong impact in economy, identity inside the region, and also a social problem because immigration has been done now, has been passing through the time, and we are losing the culture. What we decided to do as an academic people, we found that the people living in the islands of this lake, they were fishermen. However, the fishery collapsed, including one of the most precious species, native species, is called the whitefish, and it's about present is about $100 per kilo because of the flavor. Well, we had to continue with this trying to survive or to support the survival of these communities. And in the islands, our first approach have been to contact the children and the youth people, and then to make some kind of friendship, and then trying to know each other. How was the lake in the past, and what's the memories of the beauty of this lake, and when fish were around, and other animals and fauna and flora were inside this lake. And they shared with the elder people, and then we have this kind of communication to try to get a diagnostic. What shall we do to support for future actions to restore the lake and to restore the structure of the community? With this, we decided to continue with several projects. We contact the main decision structure in the community, which is the community assembly, where old people are, and then adults, but no young people. They are not allowed there, and they take decisions. We presented a diagnostic and the possibility to bring projects which could be help to support the survival and the economy. And then we started with reforestation. We started with aquaculture on native species, with native species. We support also artisanal crafts, artisany, local artisany, and also even we build an oven to make bread in el artisanal oven to make some bread, and then as we were supporting the building of some kind of cabins for tourism. So this island started to develop a proper and unique economy. They don't need it anymore, the fishery. They were independent through the time. So we are supporting now how to keep the language and the traditions there in front of the tourism and in front of the modern life, and also with the problem of the climate change, how to support this kind of living in the community. So we were asking for help to several people in the university, and we have about 40 students that they are now working in the island. And we started with problems of pollution, problems with to avoid trash and to keep all this separation of residuals in the inside the island. And also we are supporting to return to the old traditions in dancing and singing, and the legends talking between generations. And that's the way we are doing for this kind of communities. That's me.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful, and I think it ties a little bit now into my perspective with this. My experience, even though less in years, has been varied. I had the privilege of working at the Museum of Memory and Tolerance in Mexico. And with that, I was in charge of projects like this on teaching children very adult topics. How do we deal with genocide, and how do we teach them these things while still being appropriate, but including them in the lessons that this has. And through my experience in this, one thing has become very clear to me, and this is a dialogue between generations is not something that just naturally happens. It's something that has to be intentionally created, has to be facilitated, and it also has to be maintained. I say this because very often we assume that bringing different people from different generations into the same space is enough. But in reality, people arrive with very different relationships to their history, to responsibility, and even to their future. Some will come with lived experience, memory of events, conflict, or survival. Others, especially younger generations, come with a sense of urgency, many times frustration, and a desire to question that has been inherited. And I think one of the most important things in this is to acknowledge that asymmetry instead of trying to flatten it. Because when we pretend that everyone is entering this conversation equally or in the same stance, we actually silence those very important differences. But when we name it, when we can say that you may carry this experience, but I carry this perspective, that's when dialogue can finally start to become more honest. In my work, both with the lovely Marina that's here, with doing interviews or research at museums, I've seen how storytelling can be a bridge across this gap. There is something incredibly powerful about hearing someone speak not in abstract terms, but through their own lived experience. When someone tells a story about violence, displacement, resilience, it changes those dynamics of conversation. Because suddenly, history is no longer something that just belongs to the past as we're taught in school. It becomes something in which our relations between people is very tangible. Um, it's something that's being passed on almost like if a responsibility, if the stick of responsibility is passing on between generations. And I think that's where intergenerational justice can really begin. It's not just an understanding of what happened, but it's a sense of the ethical inheritance, a sense of what we do next matters in relation to what we did before. But for that to happen, participation has to go beyond, well, what is this like word symbolic inclusion? In many institutions, we're very good at inviting the younger generations into the room, but being present is not the same as having agency. And that's something that I'm very grateful to have here and to even be speaking, because it is giving the space and it is giving the agency to share your perspective and to put value on said perspective. Because when young people are only positioned as listeners, we may learn, but we don't necessarily feel responsible. Responsibility comes when you're part of the process of meaning making and decision making. Another dimension that I think it's often very overlooked is the role of emotion. In academic or institutional spaces, we prioritize rational understanding, facts, timelines, frameworks. But in spaces that deal with human rights or historical trauma, what often connects people across generations is not just information, but it's empathy. And in the moment where someone recognizes themselves in another person's experience, even if they come from completely a different context, you can start seeing each other. And that emotion connection is not just superficial. It's actually what allows people to move on from awareness to responsibility. Because you don't act on what you know, you act on what you feel connected to. At the same time, we also need to be honest about the tensions that exist between generations. There can be frustrations. Sometimes younger generations feel that change is too slow, and older generations may feel that their experiences are being misunderstood or dismissed. And I don't think those tensions are something to avoid. I actually think they're part of what makes dialogue meaningful if they're held in a space of respect and care. Because intergenerational justice is not just about agreement, it's about negotiation, continuity, and transformation. It's about asking, what do we carry forward? What do we change? And what can we do to change together? And finally, I will say that building this kind of dialogue requires continuity. It cannot be a one-time conversation or single project. It has to be something that is sustained over time where relationships are built and revisited. Because responsibility is not something that is transferred in one moment. It's something that is cultivated slowly through repeated engagement. So for me, intergenerational justice is really about creating spaces where people can encounter each other, not just as representatives of age groups, but as individuals with stories, responsibilities, and the capacity to shape what comes next. So that's me on the first question. Now I will read to everyone the second question, once again, post it in the chat, and then Cynthia, if you would do us the honor of sharing your experience on this. And for this one is, based on your experience working in communities with social tensions, what helps participatory projects become spaces of genuine connection and trust, where different voices feel heard and where it is possible to develop a sense of shared ownership? Cynthia, please.
Thank you so much. This is a really hard question because it's not something that just happens. It's something we have to build, and we have to be aware that our decisions, everyday decisions, come really hard on the solution for these problems. I've worked in community-based NGOs with initiatives when one thing has been consistent. People are not beneficiaries. They are agents of their own change. And this principle changed how participation happens. In many organizations that I've worked, teams are part of the community itself. That creates trust from the beginning, because the process is not coming from the outside, but from within. And from the start, communities are involved in shaping the solution to their own challenges. Participation is not about just being present, it's about being heard and being able to influence and what happens with their development. When people start to see that knowledge and that their decisions have real impact, they start to build ownership on the project itself. And at the same time, there's a shared responsibility, because if I feel that I am part of this project, I get a feeling of responsibility to keep it together. And that community led these processes. For those of us who are not part of that reality, we also have a role within. Our role is not to define solutions, but to support the conditions that allow them to emerge, to listen, to stay close, to connect resources, also financing, and to adapt these processes as it evolves. We act from what connects us, and not from trying to impose a reality that is not ours. Over time, this creates something very powerful. When basic needs are addressed, especially for women and girls, new voices enter the space. They have time, agency, and the possibility to be a part of the decisions that affect their communities. Also, because with these communities that are mostly male driven, women and children are often the ones that go and have to carry water or wood to support their family needs. And this, especially for young girls, leads them to be not a part of schooling or development for the communities. Also, women who tend to have a lower sense of ownership from these communities itself, they also get a voice and they start participating more, because they don't have to worry about getting water or food. In these communities, what I've seen is that they call it virtuous circles, because they create projects that, for example, they build a farm, they build farms, and they build tanques de captación de agua de lluvia. How do you say that, Aitana?
Tanks to collect water from rain.
Yes, thank you so much. And that also helps a lot of them to sustain each project altogether, because the produce that they do with farms and plants, they can sell them, and that develops their economic development. And also the farms, they can sell that produce to have more income from the houses. That also defines solutions to create better conditions for the families, and also to have a shared sense of new ownership. Also, we have worked with mothers from the start, even in helping them understanding what are their rights and their responsibilities, and that shapes communities, and that shapes the way that they interact and how they can build better life met from their families. This altogether, it's when the participation shifts. It stops being processes and becomes something that they can recognize as their own. That's where I think genuine connection happens, and that's where the shared ownership becomes possible, because the process is rooted in the community but sustained by everyone who takes responsibility for it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. And yeah, it's truly wonderful to have you here. Uh, Please, Arturo, we're ready for you now. Arturo, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we can have those two dimensions to continue with these activities inside the community. These dimensions are first to support and to motivate, to induce this consciousness, the sense of consciousness. They are people descendant from great civilizations, and we continue with that trajectory in this, in our actions and the way we talk to them, and the way to respect the way are living. The second is to continue, or the goal is to induce the processes control for development. So with that, the final horizon or the final goal to achieve is sustainable development. With that, we have several programs we can go inside to create these spaces. The first is to give them to the community updated research knowledge. We do research on their environment and we give them all the results. Continue or permanent ecological updating about the resources, about pollution, about the water quality, about all of this. After that, we continue to support the traditions, legends, and anything that can be the strength of the identity. So they are now conscious of their identity, how they are coming or descendant from a civilization. And then we continue with the ecological restoration. This will be reforestation or planting trees, native species trees, and then we can make some local agriculture with these native species. And then we have something like sewage treatment and trash treatment and all of these projects that can support the recovery of the environment. And then we have to prepare them, all the community, for to face climate change and the climate variability. And that is with local technology. For example, raise rainfall crop or solar panels and wind panels or wind generations, and also other eco technologies that can be with local technology to face adaptation and mitigation of climate change. And then we continue with strategic productive projects that can be to support the local economy, to avoid the migration of the people inside the community. And that's this crafts, artisanal different preparations in wood, in textile, and different supporting tourism and dancing and music and all of this. And then after all of this situation, we support several events like fairs that can be shown all the products, and then the tourists come to the island, and then they can buy and exchange dialogues and traditions and experiences. And then the tourism is something like ecological tourism, to avoid pollution and to avoid the creation of new systems that can be damaged to the community. And that's us in this. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And as you say, today we have a rise on the awareness of ecological tourism. And that is something that is essential to maintain these communities that now live on tourism, but also making sure that the surroundings and the areas that they live stay clean and stay clean and stay livable, not only for them, but for the species that also live there with them. So thank you for your knowledge and your work.
Thank you very much to you.
Now, with me, from my experience, I've worked mostly with projects where there's essence of social, political, and historical tensions. And in this, I've learned that trust is not something that you begin with. It's something that you build very slowly, but also very intentionally. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about participatory work is that once you invite people into a space, that automatically means you've created trust. For participation on its own doesn't actually guarantee connection. It sometimes can even reproduce distrust if it's not done carefully. So I think the first thing that really matters in this is transparency. People need to understand why the project exists, who is behind it, what the intentions are, and what will happen when they share. Especially in communities that have experienced extraction, whether that's academic, institution, or even political, there's the very justified sense of skepticism. And if that transparency is not there, participation can feel like a collaboration or more like they're being used. The second thing that I've really seen through interview work and collaboratory research is that listening has to be structured. It's very easy to say, you know what, we're creating space for different voices. But in reality, not all voices enter a space equally. Some people come comfortable from speaking, some feel safer, some are used to being heard. But more importantly, many are used to not being heard. So, participatory projects need intentional methods that ensure those quieter voices or marginalized perspectives are not just presented, but actually centered. And that requires facilitation. It requires slowing down the conversation. It requires creating sometimes smaller spaces or different formats where people can express themselves in a way they feel safe. Another thing that think is absolutely essential is authorship. People begin to trust the process when they can see themselves reflected in what comes out of it, not just as participants, but as contributors, as people who have shaped the outcome of what's being done. In my work, when I worked in museums, sometimes this looked at as co-curation or including community voices directly in exhibitions or allowing participants to influence how their stories are being told. Because when people recognize their presence in the final result, something can shift. They can move from being subjects of a project to being co-owners of the project. And I think where shared ownership can really begin. But in context of tension, we also have to talk about care and accountability. Because often people are not just sharing their opinions, they're sharing experiences that can be deeply personal, sometimes painful, and sometimes tied to trauma or injustice. And that creates a responsibility on the part of those who are facilitating the project to do three main things, in my opinion. Represent those stories as ethically, avoid simplification or distortion, even when it comes to the benefit of the person who's curating it, and maintain a relationship with the community beyond the project itself, as we've heard with our participants here today, that is something that we can very clearly see in their work. It's not just a one-time done, but it is, okay, what is the after and how do we ensure that the impact goes after? And how can we make sure that the impact is being done in an ethical way? Because one of the fastest ways to break trust is when people feel like they have opened up and then the relationship ends, or their words are being used in a way that they don't recognize. And finally, I would say that all of this requires time. And this is often where there's tension with institutions, because institutions work with deadlines, outputs, and deliverables. But trust doesn't have to operate on that timeline. Trust is built through consistency, showing up repeatedly, following through, and following through on those commitments. And I think some of the most meaningful participatory projects are those that are not treated as an isolated initiative, but as a part of an ongoing relationship with the community. So for me, that makes a participatory project space of genuine connection is not just the methods used, but the ethics behind them. It's about approaching participation not just as a tool to gather input, but as a process of building relationships, sharing responsibility, and creating something that people feel like they're truly a part of. So that's on me. Now I would like to turn this back to my co-host, who I think will be opening up the space for Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Aitana, Cynthia, and Arturo, for your contributions. They are very insightful. I would like to start to build our conversation around the questions in terms of this Mexican process of building transgenerational resilience based on empathy, transparency, respect, real inclusion shared with ownership, identity, and pride. I think these words gather multiple comments that our guests made. So with that, I would like to invite the audience to jump in and ask questions. Please go ahead.
Also, please feel free to either voice them out, or if you want in the chat and you're more comfortable with that, either is perfect.
We had a very interesting comment from Dave in the chat. Maybe Dave, if it is comfortable for you to jump in and share your your experience in voice, that would be very valuable.
I just think that Aitana, is that how you say your name, Aitana? You're so elegant in what you said, and every word so clear. You're really quite sharp on this, and I just really related and right back to some early work that I did years ago. After I'd been working in the National Brain Injury Unit as a therapist, and then was asked to run a course for youth that had dropped out of school. And here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a large and diverse population, cultural population. So we have a lot of people from different Pacific Islands. And there's high unemployment, particularly with Māori and Pacific Island people. So there are a lot of disenfranchised kids out there that have come from quite difficult backgrounds. And so I was asked to run an arts course. It was meant to be an arts course. We had no resources. We had to find sort of cardboard boxes and anything that we could use to paint on and do things. And really, a lot of the people that attended the course, they attended it to maintain their government benefit. They weren't naturally artists or anything like that. But we managed to do things, but it was very difficult to get people to show up on time. And there was a lot of infighting amongst the group. And that goes right back to colonialism. Because what happened was that the islands historically used to travel between each island all of the time through their seagoing waka, and that's going to be part of my session when I talk in a couple of hours, put into that historical perspective. And what happened was that the British and the other colonizers destroyed their seagoing waka, their seagoing canoes, to pull them apart, and there was a lot of distrust across the island. So basically, where I'm getting to is that within this group, there was a lot of distrust between those from the Tongan Islands, those from Samoa, those from Māori, those from Australia, Australia Aboriginal, and it was chaos. It was crazy. So we put on a couple of exhibitions through our community arts centre, and that gave them a little bit of self-pride. But in my comment, in the end, I thought, what can we do together? And we had one guy who was an amazing artist, illustrator, character illustrator in that sort of that comic strip sort of way. And So I said, look, let's create a comic book together. And so this is a scenario: a comet hits the Pacific Ocean, drops these crystals through the Pacific Ocean. Anybody who finds one of these crystals becomes the superhero, the god from their mythology. So you've got to go out and look into your own mythologies and look at what the characters are. And then we'll bring the characters into the story. So we had somebody who could draw and somebody who could fill in the color and somebody who could write and somebody who could do the layout. So they all came together to produce this thing. And they started showing up in time. They started getting a sense of pride. They started working together. It was just that self-esteem and connection to their past, and that they were contributing towards something together, that really lifted them up. Excuse me. And at the end of that year, the government cut the course because arts is not a gateway, a pathway to employment. You know, the way they were looked upon was that you need to get a job working in that factory, or no, you could probably be this or that. And so it was cut, and then I went off to start a company, and then they got hold of me and said, your course had the best outcomes out of every course, any course in the whole region. And all it was really was that those young people had some pride in themselves, some self-respect that they'd never had before. And they could go out and seek work and find things that they could do just because they had that confidence. So it was just, I just thought when you were talking about that inclusion, because they were, you know, some of them were 14 years old. One guy who was 60. So it was a wide and diverse and crazy group. There were skinheads, there were punk rockers, there were gang members. It was every color in the pencil box, you know. So anyway, that's, I just, what you're saying, it related me to that story. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And I found your comments, you know, becoming this part of this global web that we are committed to build. In our seminar sessions, we have been talking about these patterns that we are looking for. And I think it's amazing seeing how art, empathy, how art generates this empathy, connection, respect, different listening. So yeah, very, very, the colonial perspective made us to think that art is like secondary, but we have to rethink the place of art in recovery, the soul of the land. So thank you very much. Does anyone want to jump in?
I would like to add on to that really quickly. It reminded me of a couple of things with that. And there's the case very recently of a teacher in the US who was having problem with her students not wanting to be in their art class. And they're seniors, so in their last years of high school. And what she did was she got the kids in second grade to draw monsters from their imagination and give them a storyline, and then worked with the kids on how to create stories based on that. But then the seniors would create ceramics made incredibly inspired by the monsters that the kids would draw. And then there would be a big ceremony and everything. And then the attendance for her class was always there. Like, people wouldn't miss the class. The seniors stopped skipping, and they enjoyed that they were doing the work with the younger kids, which, you know, could often be seen as uncool or whatever. But they found a great joy just working with the kids, and then the kids at the end would get the ceramics. And a lot of them were talking about just like they found a connection with kids that they would have never interacted with if not. And then I also have we have some family members who, following the Holocaust, they were Jews all throughout Europe that arrived to Mexico, and many of them couldn't speak the same language. You know, they came from all over, and they had lost their families. And the way that they decided to have solidarity was they created a group of musicians, and they would meet every week. they couldn't understand each other, but they could understand their music. And that's the way that they created bonds after such a horrific time. It was just by sitting together and listening to music and making music without even needing a single word.
Just to pop in again, because again it reminded me of a project, but it's actually in Mexico City, that a friend of mine had been working on, and that was working with youth again, who were sort of migrating into the gangs, because there was just lack of unemployment, and so that project was to create a 1 kilometer or 1 mile mural through the town, through where they lived, where it was, covered in graffiti and all of that sort of stuff. And so what they did was excuse me, sore throat. They paired these young people up with local artists, and they paired them up with local artists, and they created a 3,000-year-old timeline and of history, because the history taught in schools, as Peter was telling me, was very limited to the last 300 years. Spanish history, not so much the indigenous history. And so these young people could be paired with an artist, choose a point in history, which would go into a slot in this long mural that started 3,000 years ago into the present day and the future. So that was a way of giving them pride in their own history and their culture, and doing something that beautified their community and taught them skills at the same time. So art is really a gateway drug for all of these other things. I don't know what happened with that project, whether it carried on or whether but I thought the approach was just perfect.
Cynthia, please go ahead.
Thank you. This connects very strongly with a role that I have witnessed working with community development in World Vision. They developed a project that was an orchestra with children from a context where there's a lot of violence, exclusion, lack of opportunities, where art created a space where children felt safe, seen, valued, but also connected to something more meaningful. Um, these children participated where drugs and violence and it was part of their life and their environment, and also encouraged by some of the younger generations. But throughout music, something shifted among them. The orchestra gave them structure, discipline, a sense of belonging, and a sense of pride in what they were building, in their abilities, and being part of something more collective. And that changed how their families also related to them, and how they started to shift in their environment as well. They started development brigades for cleaning and beautifying the buildings and the school, and started working all together to making that these negative groups were less seen, and the good people, as a philosophical sense of a way, started to gain more trust, and that's how changed how they related to themselves and their environment, and it gave them an alternative path in their contexts where that was not the norm. And whether this was also through their music and other forms of art, we've seen this allowed young people to find their voices, connect across their differences, and contribute to something much larger than themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. And we have time for one more question. Does anyone want to jump in?
I don't know how to pose the question, but all of you have also spoke to the relationship that people have to the water, from the cisterns and the protection of the fish. And we are currently at a time where multi-stakeholder dialogues tend to be defunded and focuses more on drinking water as something that is treated by a utility without looking at the multi-barrier approach, where it's first protected in the landscape where the water is. I was originally born in what is now Bosnia, where people would drink from the streams directly. Water in nature is purified. But now we see it as something so separate from ourselves that it needs to come through pipes. And so I wonder, how do we facilitate a sense of connection to watersheds in urban areas, and giving voice and permission through art, but then also governance and other ways in which people see themselves as being part of these decisions?
Arturo, would you like to jump in, because it's your field?
This is a big, big question. In the watershed always is the people on the forest, they don't know anything about the lake. In the middle of the watershed is the urban areas. They do want only fish to be brought into the market and to the restaurants and nothing else. And the people living inside the lake, they do receive the whole impact of the watershed management. We have been working about 50 years on that, and the institutions, unfortunately, the government institutions, they do take and they do have the money to restore the watershed and to manage the restoration. But always the problem is that these programs, restoration programs, are made on the desk, on the office. There is a lack of field work and conversation with the communities. That's why the academic sector, we do wanted to get field work and to share the experiences on the people, and then to start with own projects. A small project we are doing now is to restore the water springs, which are in the littoral area at the edge of the lake. So we do it manually with them. And we do have now water that we have can be drinking water with good treatment. But unfortunately, we have these separations between the way the government looks the ecological restoration and the way the community looks how the resources are needed for their own living. So in the middle, we
Pardon
are
me, not to interrupt, but we're in the last 2 minutes of our conversation now.
Okay. We do this just to support the community with better language, to link it with the government. That's all.
Thank you very much, Arturo, and everyone for being here today. It has been a very empowering session to understand that there are many things that we can do in real life to change the way of living of communities, to build culture, to build connection, to build a new way of living in balance or harmony with nature. And I would like to stay with this sentence that came from our sessions, our previous sessions, that it's the way to connect from politics and communities, and communication, it's again present there. So yeah, thank you, everyone. It has been an honor to be here.
Thank
See
you.
you soon.
Thank you all. We're very grateful for everyone's attendance.